Hello, everyone. I'm Ishita. It is a very important topic that we're discussing today because climate change affects not one, but every one of us at a societal level, at an individual level. It's always there, it's with us, and it's something we all need to talk about and do something for. But the question remains, sometimes we end up questioning, what can I do? What can an individual do? Because you're part of a very complex ecosystem and navigating it is never easy. But that's what we're here to discuss today, talk about how much individual action matters, what we can do together, what we can do individually, and how we can help the earth. So I will not go into what exactly climate change is. I think everyone here already believes in this cause strongly, and the images reflected on the screen do talk a lot about what we are facing. It is an ongoing crisis. There are extreme weather events that are recurring more frequently because of climate change, which have more drastic impacts on societies than ever we predicted before. If we move forward, we also know that we have the scientific community regularly telling us about everything that is happening, how we had to stop it in time. Maybe we've crossed that time, maybe we didn't, we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the true impact and the lasting impact of climate change that can happen. And that's what is something that people need to maybe read a bit more about, or actually we already do get bombarded with a lot about what is happening. So maybe we need to find ways that we can address these things. And they seem quite mighty when we look at them in a picture on a screen. And we feel rather small when we look at something like this and think, what can we do? But that is what is important, that there are things we can do. And that is what we have to focus on to ensure that the coming generations don't have to face it as badly. And they have a ray of hope that we leave for them, where they think they can do much better and they can help the earth. So this is just a quick reason of why we need to have action, because we have these targets that were set internationally, that we decided together as a global forum. But I don't think we often remember them because they're so futuristic at times. At times they are actually goals that no individual can accomplish. So sometimes we do feel a little demotivated and we don't give them the same address and importance as they would require. But it's still important to remember that if we have made these commitments, we do look forward to them. We have these targets set. We do, as individuals, as governments, as society, want to do a lot for our planet. And it does come at a time where it is now crucial for us to do anything. And it is wonderful to see so many people acknowledging that now is the time when we need to do action, we need to do better, and we need to go forward and make the world better. So when we talk about bringing a positive change, what can we do? We have a lot of challenges, but we are also the strongest we have ever been. We have clean technology, we have revolutionary scientists doing so much wonderful work to actually mitigate the harms of climate change. We have clean energy technologies that are trying to at source cut carbon emissions, or maybe sequester them and make it a little easier for the abiotic and biotic balance. We have scientists creating innovations that can actually save the environmental degradation, that can challenge the immense amount of innovation sometimes baffles me, but it's also the fact that they do not get enough, perhaps, portrayal in mainstream or implementation ground, which is what we have to work towards changing. And again, it's not an individual action, it's a collective action at a whole that can build into wonderful things. In research, we actually call it the snowball effect, where it starts with one tiny speck rolling into a bigger and a bigger and a bigger reaction that finally takes a big storm with it and challenges the entire ecosystem. So when we talk about government action, there is a lot that comes into the power dynamics. It's not always easy for people to get involved into government action. Government action can at times be a closed environment where we don't know what is happening. I don't know how many people know this, but every country in the world under the Paris Climate Agreement signed nationally determined contributions, where we as countries collectively set goals for ourselves and for international cooperation, where we set these certain targets that we were going to accomplish in a certain amount of time. And every country has individual goals. It is so wonderful to see. It does not matter whether they're the biggest carbon emissions, whether they're the largest industry sectors, they have all collectively decided to address these challenges. But as individuals, sometimes we don't really know where to find them, how to know about these, how to keep up with the developments made on them. And those are some mechanisms that I think governments are still working towards building. We have the wonderful UN climate meetings that happen. Again, they might not be accessible to everyone, but they are now trying to become more inclusive. The multi-stakeholder model is being given much more importance in the global diaspora. So they're trying to involve everyone they can into the process and into their decision making. When we talk about industry action, in the past few years, the amount of CSR activities that companies are doing have changed so much. There are so many examples of companies trying to do better out of social conscience, out of their commitment to maybe even compliance at times if they do not wish to actually initiate the change. Sometimes groups of individuals from industry end up getting inspired to do beach cleanups as their volunteer work. So we are seeing the industry also build a lot of momentum into where all they can make a difference. Social action has always been at the forefront of climate change and combating climate change, I feel, from the ancient times to today. We always, as a society, have worked to build a better earth, to work as a community to restore the earth. We have cultural practices going on from decades before even perhaps scientific communication came into existence, where we have these cultural practices that work to preserve our environment. And now we have the support of technology to take that further in many, many wonderful ways. And we come to the cause of today's presentation, individual action, which in my humble opinion is perhaps the most important step, because that is what sets the stage for all the other actors to actually implement change. If there is no individual demanding a better future, no one, whether it's society, whether it's industry, or whether it's government, would have the motivation to actually push themselves to do better. It's individuals who start this action at their level and then augment that effect through all the different circles of power and through all the complex channels that we have to deal with. At this point, I'd also like to ask if anyone wants to share some examples of any government action or any industry action, any social action that they've seen that was remarkable and they'd like to share with everyone.
Does it count those, like thinking of the UK, the plastic bans, for example, of the plastic bags, then they start charging for plastic bags, or the bans for straws, things like that, more into the policy and regulation and bans. That's the first thing that I can think.
That definitely does count, because that's again an action that has been initiated by perhaps authorities, but it's also something that requires response and compliance from the industry, and also as society for us to step up to carry reusable bags with us whenever we go. I remember this time where everyone started carrying their own tote bags, and it was so nice to see people come to the grocery store and not use or opt for single-use plastic, but actually bring maybe cloth bags or bring recycled bags with them. And that was a change that I was really happy to see. Even if we don't talk about the government per se, individually, when people are making more conscious choices, when they're going into what materials are being used in whatever they're buying, whether it's if they were responsibly sourced, whether if it's upcycled fashion, whether if it's recycled plastic being turned into artifacts. There are a lot of innovative ways that action has been brought to your household that you can actually bring into your daily lives. And that is where I think that equilibrium of power is now also shifting. It's no longer only with the government or with an industry. Now, even a consumer, even an individual has that choice to make, where they can do better in certain ways, or they can maybe make small changes that can have a lasting impact. For example, the increased use of reusable straws. that was such a big change that we're now seeing the entire world getting into. There's bamboo straws, there's candy straws, there's plastic straws have been, I think, abolished by many big chains now. I know for a fact in India, at least, nowadays, it's more common to get a bamboo straw or paper straw than it is to get an actual plastic straw. And as much as I think the traditionalists were against that, now people have found methods of getting recyclable containers for your takeaway food, which also is something that maybe costs a little more, but makes you feel like you're doing something better for the world. So now that power dynamic has shifted a little, and even though I always bring this back whenever I talk about climate, but I think it's very important, government and industry can only do so much. I think they are focused more on mitigation because they end up being the mass producers of carbon monoxide or any other greenhouse gas. It's social and individual action, which actually works towards adaptation, which is the part of the climate change where we talk about how we are supposed to address these changes and how we're supposed to learn to live with them and build a future where we know that we are under threat by climate, but we learn how to coexist with our environment. And that brings us to individual action. Now, I have written EMC because I thought that's a very easy thing to remember. I'm a scientific child. The EMC square equation is very deeply embedded in me. So I've kind of given that a climate angle, if you will, where I think it's very important to educate yourselves and others, because as an individual, it's always important to know what can I do. If we don't start with that question of what I as an individual can do, we'll always be feeling like we're out of the process, whether or not we want to be in the dead center of it, or even just be an ally to the change. It's very important to educate yourself in what ways you can adapt to. Introspect, that comes about self-action, where you question, is this something I can do? If it's something I can maybe lower my consumption of single-use plastic, maybe I can lower my consumption of energy by simple practices like whenever I leave the room, I will close the light. I actually have a project where we take to local communities the idea that they can innovate with the aim of impacting the social development goals. So the UN SDGs are the core focus of that program, and we ask people to build something with that. And I still feel so touched that there was perhaps a student from 6th grade who came up with the idea that they would put sensors under a mat in the front of the room and inside the room. So whenever you would step into the room, the sensor would detect that you've entered, turn on the light. And whenever you leave the room, the sensor would detect you've left and turn off the light. So even kids in 6th grade are now thinking about climate change and the impact of energy consumption. And that's a wonderful momentum that we need to keep going for. And finally, when we come to advocate, that is, I think, where we become part of the larger process as individuals. If we as individuals go to our community leaders, go to our councils, ask them. In fact, I was really pleased to know that almost 300 councils in UK have committed an action plan for environment. So if we as council members, as people who are paying a council tax, go and ask our councils, what are you doing? Can we help you in any way? Can our community work together to help you actually bring a change? We become part of that larger process and we become more centric into the climate action circles. Less air travel is perhaps, again, as long as you're being mindful about what you're doing, I feel like that wins half the battle there. And in terms of dietary changes, again, it is just about being mindful. Climate change is a wonderful movement because it's adaptable to everyone's need. And you can adapt to whatever part of it you want to as an individual, or you can also find ways that, okay, this may be out of my scope, but this is something that I can actually do. So let me do my little bit. When we talk about community, I have continued with the EMC metaphor because I do feel it's illuminating, as bad a pun that is. But as a community, again, it's important to educate your communities. This is where you share your knowledge, also build knowledge, because there are so many communities at grassroots levels doing such ingenious work. They're building local solutions for problems that are probably global and can be scaled in meaningful ways. And especially if there is a response to climate change that is working locally, it's mostly more sustainable in terms of its scalability, in terms of its feasibility to continue, and also because it uses locally sourced products. So it's always easier for the community to adapt to local solutions. When we say mobilize, it's really important to collaborate your action, even as a community. If you have maybe 5 people going to do a beach cleanup, if you talk about it, if you spread the word, you'll always find 2 or 3 more people who are saying, okay, probably this weekend is a little sunny. It's possible for me to step out. Let me go with you. Let me join this. And they may not be consistent. They may not be there always, but even that one day where they spend with you, it's all the more helpful to your cause. So it's always better to collaborate. And many a times collaboration leads to the most wonderful ideas. So you can actually expand your action into ways that you maybe didn't consider before. And when I say commit and leverage privileges, it's something that I feel personally really strongly about. Every one of us who lives in an area with clean water, with probably good air quality, with any such facility, if we learn to be mindful about our environment, if we become grateful for the things we have, it always pushes us to do better for the world. So we will always try and do better. There are people who have many talents in media marketing. If they join local movements of climate change and help people bring in online supporters, there are people who know how to crowdfund really well. If they start supporting local movements where they help them with their skills or donate in kind with their skills, it always helps the movement get augmented further in small, meaningful ways, or at times snowball into large impact. And that brings us to the main focus of today, the individual action checklist. So Eco Action is actually a wonderful initiative, and I'm so glad I could be a part of it because it highlights what specific actions you as an individual could make to contribute to the global climate movement. In terms of mindful water usage, I think, again, that's something, maybe I'm from a science background, so I learned about recycling from that angle. But I think everyone talks about the 3 Rs in their school: reuse, recycle. We now are going into land degradation. Nowadays, I know a lot of kids in school are learning about how land quality and soil quality is declining over time and how that's a risk people are facing. We learn about the climate ecosystems, we learn about the weather patterns, and we learn about the disruptions these are facing by climate change. So mindful usage is something that's being put into us more and more nowadays. So it's been given due weightage here by being the first point where you are mindful about your water usage. And the second is turning off lights. I already used that example, but I think energy consumption is something that we as individuals feel a lot, specifically in London. I remember there was a winter where the heating bill nearly gave me a heart attack. So it's always good to be mindful of your energy consumption. Not only does it help your pocket, but it helps the environment, it helps your community, and it does make a difference. When we say use public transport, it's again going back to mindful choices. There are days when probably it's not feasible to do so, and that is completely understandable. But the days when you can, it might be an easier solution if it just one commute you can give for the greater good. Then it always comes back to you in unexpected ways. When you combine errands is also something that, okay, it requires planning, it requires effort, but in the end, it always ends up streamlining your day as well. And it'll end up helping your carbon footprint and reducing that significantly. Mindful flying is again something we've spoken about, but I think it bears reconsideration that, again, there are times when you cannot avoid a certain action. But even if nowadays you check when you book a flight, it mostly tells you this flight has this much CO2 emissions. Even if as an individual you think about, okay, I traveled a lot this year, maybe I'll give towards plant drive. Maybe I'll go and I'll help plant some trees. Maybe that'll offset my personal carbon footprint a bit. As an individual, it doesn't take that much of effort, but in the longer run, if everyone starts to do these things, imagine the impact we would make. Then we move on to the next part, which is informed diet. This is again something that I think does come with a certain amount of privilege. If you're lucky enough to be able to make these conscious choices, it's the most amazing thing to do. If not, it's also okay, because there are always other ways that you can join the movement. But in terms of covering this, it's always nice to just maybe use ethically sourced meats, maybe contribute to local produce and produce that is in season, that hasn't been flown in from anywhere. Even those small differences can actually help you make a big change, because you don't contribute to the carbon footprint of importing. And most of the time, the fresh produce has a different taste than anything else. So it has a lot of health benefits for you as well. When we cover food waste, that is again a challenge that I think is a lot. Specifically, I have grown up across two developing nations, India and Indonesia. I have seen situations where we know specific areas of a country are facing famine for a long time. We do need to make sure that we end up building our food reserves. We end up building, even when I spoke about land degradation, that is a big concern in a lot of countries, because we know that if land degrades further, our produce is going to fall. And that may mean that even as consumers or as exporters, we may not have enough produce to serve people who we actually end up contributing to. So maybe talking about reducing food wastage, mitigating it in some way, finding ways to repurpose food. If you're maybe in a bakery, you have leftovers, donate them. If as an individual you made extra food, you could always share the food with the homeless. You could find ways in which that food could be used. Avoiding single-use plastics. Now, that is something that actually, as individuals, we should commit to wholeheartedly, because even governments and bureaucracy have pushed through the channels to enable that for us. So as individuals, that becomes more of an opportunity for us to reinforce that brilliant movement and make sure that we reduce the single-use plastics. This also requires a certain amount of awareness. This is where the educate yourself part comes in, because you have to understand the different types of plastic. But again, small, meaningful changes can create a big impact. When we say reduce paper usage, as a technology-friendly person, I'm fortunate to be able to contribute to that. And I understand that it's also something that depends on choice, depends on accessibility requirements, and many other factors. But if you're in a position where you can adopt any of these practices of reducing paper wastage, you end up contributing a lot, because you reduce felling that is used in production, you reduce your wastage produced in the house. Many a times recycled paper is actually a bit more expensive to buy. Again, if you can do that, that is amazing. But otherwise, even recycling paper at home is something that a lot of people are doing nowadays, which is again a very small, meaningful way that you can build a new hobby and help the environment. When we talk about not upgrading your devices, that is something that does a lot with mindful consumerism. We do, again, if you're privileged enough to have devices, you do have that propensity to go that, okay, I can upgrade my device. At times, it is necessary, which is when it's fantastic to do so. But if it's just because you're comparing yourself to another person, or if it's a social pressure, it's always better to just take a minute, stop, and introspect that, do I really need to make this purchase? Is it really time for me to do this? Can I upcycle my device? Can I buy a refurbished device? Can I reduce my carbon footprint in that way? So again, that one moment of introspection can help you make a responsible choice. Mindful fashion is something that, again, is upcycling. Maybe it can also be going for sustainable material. It can be going for cottage industries that are promoting local artisans, that are trying to be mindful in their sourcing and in their development. And it also does a lot, because if you're choosing responsibly sourced material, many a times it's organic, it's healthy for you. It's, as a consumer, it empowers you to make the right choice. And that at times can be really good. Also, a lot of indigenous fabrics were actually made in response to environment. So if you see, cotton as a fabric is often used in warmer climates because it's more breathable, it's more airy. So you can go for actual natural fibers, you can go for more easily and locally resourced fabrics that are better for the environment and for your skin. Online consumption is point 12. It is, I think, very important in today's day and age, because if we talk about the extent of online information we have, it's dizzying, whether it's about generic information, whether it's entertainment, whether it's critical information. We are bombarded from all sides, from all these screens, whether it's your laptop, whether it's your phone. It is a source of energy consumption. For example, a lot of people who were playing around with generative AI, initially ChatGPT, did not realize that every question you ask produces a certain amount of water wastage. It was only later, when newspapers started covering it, when it started coming into mainstream media, that people realized that every question you pose to a generative AI mechanism uses at least 15 kilotons, if I'm not wrong, of water. And that was something that was an alarming rate for a lot of environmentalists, because they did not realize that that was the impact that new technology can have. So online consumption is something that the more mindful we are of, the better it is for us, because it's also something that is leading to, as consumers, being bombarded with this pressure that if I do not have the same thing as what I'm seeing, I'm not at par with them. Maybe I feel left out. Maybe I feel sort of cornered into a section where I'm like, no, I want this just because I saw this person using it. At times, it can be really helpful to get suggestions, but there are also wonderful influencers now who are actually climate conscious. So they do talk about making ethical choices. They do share ethical resources when they can. So it's also very important to have that personal discernment of where you want to conform to something that you're viewing and where you want to digress from what you're viewing, because it's not as easy to protect ourselves from this, but nevertheless crucial. Then staying informed about environmental issues, that again is very crucial. I mean, if anyone has been keeping tabs on the Dubai rains, nobody in Dubai expected it to rain so much, and they were suddenly, their infrastructure could not handle the impact. Their societies were impacted in a very major way. They had to cease operations for a few days. So every community that's being faced with unprecedented challenges has to either look out for support or build resilience within their own communities. And to do that, it's very important to be informed. If I did not have prior information of a heat wave coming, I would not be able to prepare myself. So it's very important to stay on top of learning about environmental issues, learning about their impact, learning about what is going to be the consequence of, maybe if there's a storm coming, what consequences could it have? It would also lead you to develop action plans in personal action and community action. If you know that something that's going to happen is going to impact others, you're always going to be prepared a little bit more for that. Participating in local environmental initiatives is, again, putting yourself on a stage of environmental action where you can do a lot. You can join forces with other people and make significant change. Encouraging friends and families to join more your sustainable way of living. This also comes under sharing your education and under advocating for a better future. Because if I, as an individual, decide to maybe ban single-use plastic in my house, it's not the easiest thing, because I'll have to explain it to my parents, my grandparents. I will have to make them understand why I want to do this, what impact I see, and why it'll be a good decision for our family. And that helps us motivate them into this. Then when we talk about raising awareness in your community, again, the introspection of your choices is something that, when shared, can inspire others as well. So it's always good to talk about these things, to advocate for more, and discussing with your leader on how to make your community more sustainable. That is, again, something interesting. And I think it does a lot for, again, before, the power dynamic was only local authorities could do something, community action could do something. Now it's more about what we all can do together and what I can do. So I'll again pose a question. If any of you want to share an experience of an individual action that you thought you heard arguments against, or if you want to just talk about an individual action you have taken in recent that you think has led to contributing to the climate change movement?
Individual checklist. This is amazing to see in front of me. Time to time, I felt proud of myself. Time to time, I was like, oh, I feel like I'm not doing much around this bit, you know? So I definitely try to kind of combine my errands. For example, if let's say I need to hand wash something, I try to kind of fill the water in a bowl and let them stay in there instead of just, you know, letting the water running there and washing them. I'm trying to use also my dishwasher, but obviously I'm just on my own, so I cannot fill it in one day. So what I try to do is I try to pre-wash them, but the way I wash them is in a bowl, just to take, you know, the dirt away, and then I'm filling I'm filling my dishwasher, which is kind of end of the week. So in the end, I put one wash in. I'm lucky to have enough cutlery and everything, so that doesn't bother me. So that's one thing that I do, because I feel like our water resources are getting lower and lower, which is so sad. So we do have to be mindful around this topic, as well as with the lights. Even though some of the most of the times we don't realize how much of the electricity we use, because it's not only the lights, unfortunately, is the time we spend on TV, the time we spend with the oven, the time we spend on our computer. And I try to take time with having screen-free time, and I try to take walks in the park. I try to, I don't know, read book on my leisure time. I don't choose to be on screen. Again, is also I feel like is healthy in a way, less radiation, but as well as less usage of electricity, because other than that, I don't use much electricity at nighttime. And mindful flying, that's something that I'm working on, just to put out there as a, you know, one of the points that made me feel a bit embarrassed. It is hard to kind of arrange around that if you have family living abroad, because kind of taking the flight is less expensive, you know, quicker and everything. But around that, what I'm trying to do is I avoid flying unnecessarily. So if it's family related, yes, I do take the flight. But if it's, again, leisure time, I try to take the train as much as I can, or drive as much as I can, with choosing to kind of rent a electrical car rather than a petrol gas using car. So this type of things, of course there are more points, but I feel like passing the ball to someone else and hearing from them. It's been such a long time, Julius. Would you like to share what you're doing with your individual checklist? It will be nice to hear you. Hello again.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're
Yeah.
Yes,
audible.
okay. Thank you. In my seminary, because I am a seminary rector, we are trying to do some of these things in the checklist as individual, at the individual level and also at community level. And we actually came up with action plans for our next academic year to extend our action plans to our local community. Our challenge right now is consistency. All of us, we are having the awareness, but the problem is the consistency. For example, segregation of wastes, we decided that we will do it promptly, and it is really working. But because of inconsistency, we need to remind each other very often. But as the speaker explained, even if it's not consistent, it's okay as long as something is done. So that is what we are doing so far, and we hope to do more. I am also teaching in one of the institutions here, and I keep always informing my students about awareness of the small actions they can take to make an impact to the environment where they live. And I think some of them are getting the mindfulness, especially with the use of water. And some of my students also tell me that, oh, we didn't know that we can do this. And they are getting the awareness and they are very happy. So I am also extending in that way as I am teaching. I try to chip in. For example, the good goals, good happy goals, the UN goals for achieving sustainability that just comes in a small clip. I try to play that on YouTube to them, and just to bring that awareness. So that's what I am doing at my personal level. But I hope slowly, maybe the snowball effect will increase. So when I also give assignments to my students, I try to find questions that touch around issues of the environment, such as to give them more time to do research and understand for themselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julius.
Yes.
Anyone else who'd like to go?
Hi. Thank you so much, Ishita, for the presentation so far. I'd like to add a little bit on what we do on the list. So I think what is interesting is that you always have to make choices how well you are doing, and still there are stuff that you really would like to keep on doing, like taking a long shower, for example. So this is something I wouldn't say struggle with, but it is something to like a guilty pleasure or something. And what I also find interesting was your point number 13, is to stay informed about environmental issues. People have been trying to make an impact in a good way on environmental for a long time now, but the idea on what would work and what would not work has been changing. So, for example, I was thinking of using mugs made out of clay, for example, in the office instead of using plastic cups, because the whole discussion was like, what is more is worse for the environment? Is it the plastic or the amount of water you use to clean your reusable mug? And that is another thing that I think I struggle with sometimes, is to getting to know what is the right thing to do, because sometimes there are conflicting yeah, what is the word? It's conflicting to what choice you should make. So I was wondering if maybe you have some tips in that regard.
I won't say tips, but the first thing I will say is I think all three of you said something really interesting about how you feel guilty when you see certain points on the list. But I'll just start by saying it's something that I said in the beginning also and now also. Climate change is such a vast, interconnected process that if we focus on what we can't do, I think all of us, it's why climate doomism as a term was made. Because we all suddenly start feeling like we probably feel hopeless or we feel like we haven't done enough. But if we focus on what we can do, I think all of you are doing things in your own way. which is wonderful because even if you're doing that little bit, it always translates into more meaningful ways. In the grander scheme of things and in the bigger picture, it'll always be fruitful. It's better than not doing it. So whatever little we do, it's more than enough because it's a starting point for us. We don't know whether it'll become something bigger. We don't know if it'll stay the same, but just having that desire to do better is, I think, the first step for most people when they're dealing with something this complex. And to hear all of you trying to do this is amazing. Even I think the most seasoned environmentalist will struggle with making these choices because of the world we live in. It's never going to be easy. In fact, it reminds me of this series. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's called The Good Place. And they actually dealt with one episode where they showed how difficult it is to make ethical choices in today's complex world. Even if we're trying to do good, we unintentionally might be doing something that doesn't work. But at the end of the day, the fact that we want to do better will always lead us to a better path. So that's the starting point for a lot of people. And that's what I think is more important to focus on, that if I want to do better, I will do better. I may unintentionally do something that may not be as good for the environment, but we'll live and we learn and we'll adapt and we'll do better the next time. So that I think is something that's really important. If in fact leads us to the next slide, where whatever you're doing, it does hold a lot of impact. So we have to keep doing that. We have to push through, and we have to, whenever we feel that self-doubt, that whether what we're doing is right, whether what we're doing is enough, we have to remind ourselves that we've come a long way. I personally remember there was a time when, okay, I can say I was ignorant because I was very young. I didn't know the impacts of my choices. But now I know there are many times that I make the ethical choice, not because it was something that I want, but because something I feel responsible for doing. And slowly that becomes habitual. And this also leads us to the point of how does one actually achieve this checklist? Because the checklist is very comprehensive. Even if you see the fact that what I personally really liked about the format is it's been linked to the social development goals. So you know where you're making an impact by doing what you're doing. So your mindset and approach has to be more focused on what you're doing. And that's what we just discussed. So as long as you remember that I want to do better and I have to do better, I think that's half the battle won, because intention is something that does reign supreme. And once you learn ways to do it, you'll always end up doing better. So that's crucial. Then when we talk about managing climate anxiety, that is something I really struggled with, to be very honest. I remember when I was going through the NDCs only, in fact, I had to create a database on what every country has committed for climate change. And when I saw the progress, I felt really sad. It took me a little while to kind of get to grips with that, okay, we are ambitious, but we don't know who's going to do what. But it's very important for you to learn ways in which you can help yourself. I help myself by following people who share good news. I don't know if you know Sam Bentley, but he's on Instagram, and that's a platform I use quite often. And I ended up unfollowing a lot of pages that were giving me bad news. And then I ended up following him and focusing on the innovations he would propagate, because they would always be something that is trying to mitigate climate change or address certain concerns with climate change. So that was a small change I made that I think helped me. And I made a rule that if I read 3 bad news articles consecutively about environment, I will search for one thing positive in that. So I would pick up whatever term. If I read about how much energy consumption is happening, I would always look up for something, if there's a new technology that's helping people, if a lot of waste is being produced, if segregation is a challenge with litter, I always used to search for maybe there's someone who's doing something, some movement that's happened, which is good. So that's how I dealt with this. But I think everyone would have their own coping mechanisms. And again, as a community, if anyone wants to share that, if they can just raise their hands, it would be lovely to tell other people of ways that you dealt with your climate anxiety.
The more you try to do ethical choices and that you reflect on the things that you are consuming, the more overwhelmed you are, because then you realize that anything could be problematic. So that is a trouble that I sometimes feel, that of course, I'm already doing quite a few things to be more conscious, but the more I see, it's difficult to keep the hopes down. So what I do try to take breaks sometimes. It's not that I just dive into those guilty pleasures, but I try not to look too much, give a time, and then go back to learning, but not all the time looking at everything at all the time, because the way that the system is and the world is now is quite difficult to find for the perfect thing. Then you ended up feeling like you should not even exist. That just by existing you are already causing some negative impact. But I think it's important that we do exist and that we are conscious, and then we can make the difference. So try to shift the negative and make it positive.
That is good, because I do feel we should exist. I won't go that far. But yes, I think it's also something that communities have struggled with a lot. I mean, from the start, why our cultural practices were rooted in environmentalism was because we always knew that we're sharing our space with nature. So we have to respect it. We have to learn ways to live with it instead of being against it. And I think now I find a lot of people going back to that track, which is amazing to see, which is also keep learning. That is again part of the whole movement, where if you don't know what's happening, you will end up not being able to address it. So it's always better, like Yevine said very wonderfully, that you could take breaks maybe. Times when it becomes overwhelming, it's always good to take a step back for a few days, refresh yourself, and then come back to it, because it's never gonna be easy, but it is essential for us. So we have to sort of balance the need versus the overwhelming aspect of something as big as this. When I talk about mapping actions, this is more about introspection, technically. It's about maybe using the checklist. After a week of activities, you come back home and just think about in the week, where all in the checklist could you have done something more meaningfully? Where could you have been more mindful of what you threw away? Whether maybe instead of buying something new from a store, you could have gone to a thrift shop and bought something from there. Whether you could have bought refurbished furniture, whether you could have bought recycled plastic. It's going to be something or the other all the time. But just taking those few moments in your week where you introspect on your actions will help you map that, okay, this is perhaps where I could have done better. And maybe next week, that'll be my goal, that I'll try to be better in this particular way. When I talk about finding and building support, I think you've already taken the first step by being here today. But other ways also, it's always, at least for me, I am a little codependent when I'm trying to do something difficult. It's always nice to have someone to talk about, okay, I messed up today, or okay, I did this right today. So somebody who can share your successes and who you can lean on when you feel lost in the grander scheme of things. So it's always good to find a community or find a friend, maybe just sometimes even holding a diary, a gratitude journal, where you map everything down. You can become your own support system through that. And you can build that checklist with yourself, that introspective time with yourself, where you recuperate, where you assess what you've done and figure out the next steps for yourself. Taking breaks is really essential. I will stress on that again. Almost everything that you have to do when it comes to climate, it is really important to at times take a step back to just decompress, because it's not an easy battle. And it's not, I don't know, there's no right or wrong when it comes to climate. It's an ongoing complex challenge that is changing faster than you can change your habits. So you'll never know what's right, what's wrong. You'll always have to make these split decisions, which can be very exhausting. So it's very crucial to take breaks, to take care of yourself, so that you can do better and take care of the environment. And the last one is something I think all of us really keep doing. It's why we're here and why we'll continue to come back, is keep hoping and praying and wishing for a better future for yourselves, for your communities, and for everyone around you and the future generations, because their needs do scare me at times when I think about the world we're going to be leaving for them. it's really important for us to keep that in our head, that it's not something that we're going to take with us. It's something that's going to be passed on to people coming after us, to the next generation. And so we have to remember that we're not only doing this for ourselves, we're also doing this for the generations that are coming in the future. And that's why we have to keep going. So thank you so much. That's the end of the presentation, but I think we'll take, if anyone has any questions now, you can let us know.
Thank you very much for all the insights, Ishita. I think it was quite wonderful the way you talked about the power dynamics. I think it is quite eye-opening, because sometimes we do think it's not on us, it's on the government to do. And I think you pointed out quite well that, well, the government is for the mitigation, but we have a big role in the adaptation, because we do need to start doing what we know already that it should be done. And of course, behavior change is not easy. And like you, Ishita, pointed out, there's always something in the list that we will feel a little bit like a little bit guilty or a little bit strong about. But I think the way to see the list is more of a guide as well. It's not like we are not trying to make anyone feel guilty or embarrassed, but to at least take one step back and reflect. Do I really need to do this, or at least to be aware of, yeah, when if I still insist in doing this, I know that those are the impacts that it will have in the environment for all of us, basically. But yeah, let's check maybe you want to check in the chat.
I have, in fact, I'm really glad you guys shared the links, because I think it's really important for anyone who's getting into this. It's really important for you to keep up with it, because like I said, your local council has a climate action plan. The governments all over the globe have submitted these nationally determined contributions where they want to do better. They've given proper targets of reducing emissions or addressing certain challenges about implementing renewable energy in their countries. So it's always good, because as individuals, if you have the opportunity to bring that up and to hold people accountable, it's always good, because it maintains the check and balance of the system. And it also tells you what your country is focusing on, and that ways you can adapt at a local level. So again, if they are focusing on the mitigation at a grander scale, it's up to individuals to take up the local action and to take up individual action where they say, okay, you're doing your bit, let me do my bit, and let me make sure that my community, my household, and I am responsible for the environment around me. For the last two comments, I will say this, that anything in extremes is bad. It's why I say you should always take breaks, because it's an exhausting movement to be a part of, even as an ally, even as an observer. But again, your way might not be the same as someone else's. So the way you express yourself will not correlate with some people, may resonate with some people. It's always up to the individual. That's why the whole motive of this webinar was to tell you that individual action really matters. So you have to be mindful of what you're doing and how you're going to impact others with what you're doing. And it is definitely easy to forget that sometimes it does make you feel many different emotions. There are times when if I see someone who dismisses climate change, it at times saddens me, at times angers me also, because it feels like it's so obvious to someone who's facing heat waves, to someone who's seeing extreme weather every day. It feels very obvious and in your face that this is all climate change. I mean, we've been facing the most weird time where right now it's supposed to be summers in India, and Indian summers are brutal. But suddenly we had rain for a few days in between. So a lot of crops got destroyed. People weren't prepared for the rains. A lot of people had to face that. Suddenly we went into extreme heat for a few days. Nobody had time to prepare from one to another. That was also the time we heard Dubai was facing rains. Again, a classic example where the infrastructure wasn't ready for the impact or the change of the climate suddenly. They know when rain is coming and they prepare accordingly. if any weather pattern changes without people knowing about it, it's very difficult to protect yourselves. So at times I feel so obvious that climate change is happening, but we also have to understand that the world is a big place. There are a lot of people who are facing many different struggles, and they may not give as much weightage and importance to climate. But this is also something that needs to find a balance where you should be aware of what's happening, but it's okay to not be. It's okay to be out of the loop as well. But that's where individuals come in, where if you see the action, you tell them that, this is happening in my part of the world, so maybe I could hope for some empathy from you.
That reminds me of the opposite. When the heat wave hits UK, we are really unprepared and people don't know how to deal with that. Anxiety rises, all the hospitals starts filling up. So, none of the infrastructure, even, individual level, the houses are not prepared to tackle that. So yeah, unfortunately, climate change is real. It keeps happening. We don't have any more the seasons that we used to know. Spring doesn't feel like spring, winter doesn't feel like winter, summer doesn't feel like summer, and fall is just all the seasons together. So yeah, we need to be prepared. Governments need to do their part too, and also at individual level, we need to do our bit. There are some questions in the chat. I don't know if you'd like to refer to them, Ishita. There's actually one question by Ted. He was asking about the demonstrations and blocking highways.
So I'll go back to my point that I said. The way you express yourself is very different from other people. It is a form of expression they're choosing. It is disruptive, no doubt. I would never justify it. But if they have a reason to maybe feel that frustrated, we have to find that balance between disruption and empathy. And we have to be considerate of the fact that they might have a very different perspective on the movement. I personally do believe in a more peaceful way and a more individual orientation of this, because again, there are times when there are days when I feel probably my local authorities aren't doing much, and there are days when I feel they've done something really wonderful. So it changes. Everyone's way of responding to this is very different. And I think the more accepting we can be, the easier it is for us as a society to deal with this. But yes, disruptions can be very sad for people, especially if it's a critical situation. So we have to probably find a better way to join the movement, but I think everyone has their own way of finding their place.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. There is we see people being frustrated with governance, and then they do feel the need. Like I heard another day a podcast which was interviewing one of the Extinction Rebellion, the woman who threw the tomato can on the Van Gogh painting. And she was showing her point that she's been through all the steps. She already had done everything, and she still feels very frustrated that she cannot be heard. And yeah, again, it's not something that I will do, because I think from my perspective, we actually can have the opposite response, because then the more you disrupt, the more people start to be against you and diminish the calls, like all those people who do not care about everyone else and doing this and disturbing, and they are causing even more pollution because the traffic is stuck and blah blah blah. But I think it's as you said, that we need to be understanding, and everyone can choose whatever they do, but just reflect on the impacts they will have. Thank you, Ishita, for all the insights. As I said, I really had many points that were eye-opening. I hope that everybody also could get something, and especially something positive, and feel motivated and encouraged to continue. I think everybody who joined are already aware of the problems that we have, are interested in doing something positive for the environment, for all of us, and which is very special because today is Earth Day. Yay! And yeah, so thank you, and thank to everybody who joined, especially hearing from yeah, all the things that you are doing, the things that you struggle to, like sharing. Then we have a sense that we are in this together, and it makes the discussion a lot more interesting for everybody.
Thank you, Ishita. Your wisdom, your guidance was such an eye-opener. You think like you know everything, but you know, when you talk to like-minded people, as well as our audience like Julius, sorry, I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Hearing from you was also such an eye-opener. It's always good, you know, sharing is caring. You always learn a little bit more what's happening, what else you can do, what is missing. That a little bit extra is always good to hear it from others. Yes, as Yuin mentioned, please spread the word, what we are trying to do, our work. Maybe you will be interested, but you know, also you have friends, you have other networks that would be interested. Togetherness brings action. Thank you so much for your time again. I appreciate you, and wishing you have a good rest of day, evening. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Good Earth Day. Bye-bye.
Yeah.